Hi, I'm Dave Wedzik, and I'm here with Eric Barzeski,
Hello.
and we're going to be taking a look today, a key for sweet spot path video, and we want to talk about the difference in the swing directions, or what we would call a path that will be moving outward or inward. And in this case, we've shown two videos. The one on the left was a sweet spot path moving clearly too far into out, or too far outward, we would describe that as. And on the right, we've shown one where the player's sweet spot path is moving very much out to in, or we call that inward, as far as the sweet spot path direction. Now I'm going to move this video back to, I'm going to move it back to what we would term as part of the five simple keys sort of terminology. We would call this position A6, and it's where the club shaft is back parallel to the ground on the downswing. So some might call this last parallel before impact, but we just term this simply as A6. And you'll notice that, well, at first you saw these sweet spots trace the arrows along and kind of the direction in which they went, but you'll notice now in a still picture, on the left-hand side, the player's sweet spot is very much inside his hands, and on the right-hand side, the sweet spot is very much outside the hands. The point here is that those pictures are, in this case, very telling. You can see pretty clearly that the sweet spot path is inside and outside the hands, and it moves, when on the swing that's inside the hands, it moves very much into out or outward, and on the right side swing where it's outside the hands, it moves very much inward or across the ball.
Right, and for 90% plus of golfers out there, this position A6 is fairly telling. If the club head is inside your hands, you are going to tend to see a swing path that's outward or rightward for a right-handed golfer. And if the club head is outside the hands, you're going to see a swing path that's inward or to the left for a right-handed golfer. For 90% plus of you. But there are some weird cases out there.
Right.
That we're going to get into here
And with
shortly.
most golfers, the players like on the left are going to tend to hit more of, pushes and hooks. Again, this is a generality, but you're going to see more pushes and hooks. And with the golfers like on the right, you're going to see more pulls and cuts and slices and sort of thing. So again, like Eric said, it's generally 90% of the time very telling. We're going to make a quick switch to the videos here. So remember, generally speaking, these positions we're going to see when that club reaches, again, what we call A6 or last parallel, are quite telling in regards to the direction that the sweet spot is swinging. And you can see a lot of these things from video, but not always. And that's what we want to go into now, is how sort of these things can be a bit misleading. And it's really important to know not only where the club is at and see where the club or the sweet spot is at, but where it's moving from and where it's moving to. So we're looking right here at some videos that we shot earlier with Eric, and where he was purposely trying to make some swings that sort of demonstrated this stuff. These weren't about hitting the ball solid or anything, but this was about trying to make swings that we could get the club sort of lined up, so to speak, or looking proper. And you can see that when I say proper, sort of close to in line with the hands, the sweet spot in line with the hands at A6. And you can see that in both these videos here where we've stopped them, it's pretty close. They're not a long way apart. And you could expect, if you saw just this position, that maybe, you might expect to see a certain shot, maybe a fairly straight shot or a little push with a draw or something like that. But you should notice when you're looking at these that the body positions are quite different. We're going to talk about that here as we go along. And we also have some real world examples we're going to take a look at too, as these were just sort of, we were sort of staging these videos, but we're going to look at some real world stuff with students here in a minute. But Eric's going to go ahead and run these videos back up to the top. We'll start with the one on the left. And what you're going to notice is that think about where that club was at that A6 position, but notice where it's coming from here and where it's going to be going to. So he had the club in a very laid off position at the top. It was very shallow, and to get this club sweet spot back to the ball, he's had to essentially throw the sweet spot around the corner very fast. His left wrist will start cupping. He'll be doing a lot of things here to try to, in fact, if Eric draws a line here from this position, you'll notice that, if we were to look at sort of a plane, so to speak, or where that shaft is pointing. It's well out above the baseline or where the ball's laying on the ground, sort of that extended target line, and he's going to in a real short amount of time have to make a lot of compensations to try to get that sweet spot back to the ball. And you can see right here his arms are rolling over very fast. The club head is being thrown to the inside very quickly. And again, it's about this, the from and to kind of thing that we're talking about, where this club sweet spot is going from and where it's going to. It might, in this case, pass through a position that looks pretty solid, but again, this is where it can be very misleading. You can see this, again, very difficult to play at a high level or very consistently doing that. So if we look over here on the right, we've gone ahead and done something pretty much opposite. And he made a swing here where he took the club sort of steep, pushed it a little bit across the line. And what he's trying to do on this swing is from this sort of left arm, kind of a little bit outward club shaft steep position as he starts down, figure out how to get the club back from the inside, right, and try to hit this ball solidly. And you can see he does a pretty good job trying to find the golf ball here from that very awkward position. And this is, as instructors, we see students in these positions. As golfers who watch your own video, you may be someone out there who sees something like this. And I assure you there are ways to hit the golf ball from here, but it's very difficult. And again, when we see the picture that shows us that last parallel A6, it can be very misleading. The problems here is that as Eric starts this down with his club very steep, in order to try to shallow it at all or get this club from the inside, you can see his head pulling back very much away from the target line, his body straightening up. He's sort of, some might call this early extending. He's doing everything he can, and that's very much shifting the path of the sweet spot out to the right hard. And again, think of where the club's coming from and where it's going to kind of thing. Would create this extremely outward path and some situations where you'd get some big bushes and even some hooks, that kind of thing.
Right. So if I was a student who was trying to hit a draw, I should not just go to this position and say, success, because I'm coming from here.
Right.
Passing through here to this, and you don't see too many people, on tour with their bodies pretty much forming a straight line at impact. So
not great impact alignments.
Not a great way to hit a draw, even though just by looking here again, the club head would be just inside the hands. So.
Right. So as a golfer, if you're looking at things like that in your videos or instructors seeing that, you've got to trace that back further. You've got to go back further. You can't have those kind of compensations going on during the downswing. It's just not enough time for those kind of compensations. We'd like, if at all possible, most efficiently to have that sweet spot being directed fairly straight down the plane and onto the ball rather than so many compensations during that downswing. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at some real-world stuff with a couple students here.
So here are a couple real-world examples. You can see we've stopped each of them at 6. They're both pretty much online with the hands. You can also see that we've blocked out their faces to protect the identities of the guilty in this case. And Dave will walk us through, again, 6, they line up, but it's not necessarily always about 6. It's about where the club was, the sweet spot was, and where it's going to.
Yeah, and point of note here before we look at these, and these are just a couple students that this is sort of before swings as they showed up for a lesson. They were both having some problems with their ball striking. That's why they came. And a point of note would be that you'll notice differences in their bodies in these positions, et cetera, but we're talking about sort of at least approximately how that sweet spot looks in relation to the hands at this position of the swing. And, we've got very slightly different camera views, and so we're not talking about the exactness of this sweet spot in relation to the hands at this point, but just the general, in general terms, how it's fairly, lined up in at least at that spot, right there. In the left, you can see it's almost right in line with the hands. On the right here with a driver, it's actually still slightly above the hands, but and still slightly inside the hands. So we could say that was going to be kind of very much in line. So what we're talking about is just the overall look at where that, in these cases, where that sweet spot is moving from and where it's moving to, even though it's hitting a fairly, what someone might call a standard good position at this A6. So let's go back and I'm gonna have Eric run the video back. And we're gonna look at the one on the left first, and you're gonna notice this is very reminiscent of the one. It's very similar to the swing that Eric did for us earlier that we looked at. The club coming from the top was very kind of laid off. Was sort of in a shallow laid off position as he started down. And that sweet spot, then, as a player, he was feeling that he had to really work hard to get it to kind of back out in front of him and to the ball. So he's throwing it very fast, sort of around the corner, is what I'd like to call it. Or, he's gone from laid off and he's going to kind of try to work it back out in front of him fast and almost has to steepen it there. And you'd notice from the face-on view, and we saw this with the video, that his left wrist was cupping very fast to make this happen. And you can see, you would understand easily how that would cause some ball striking issues. And if Eric's going to runs that back through impact, back into that follow through again, you'll see how quickly this left wrist breaks down, the arms roll over, and the sweet spot kind of disappears left and around his body. And again, we're talking about where it's going from and where it's going to, and how it's really not being directed directly down the plane late. In fact, it's just there's a lot of compensations going on in getting from this top of the backswing and start down position to the ball, and you can see how shallow that is, to the ball and then into the follow through. So if we go ahead and now we'll take a look over here on the right, and you're going to notice again we did some of these swings with Eric earlier, so this is going to be similar to what we saw earlier in the swing where he was swinging too much to the right, or the club was very steep as it started down. You'll see this golfer has that club sort of across the line, and then the left arm shifts outward very early. The club shaft is steep or standing up, and then especially because this is the driver, he's doing everything he can to make these compensations late during the downswing and have that path shift out to the right enough so he can hit the ball. And you can see, again, think of this where it's coming from and where it's going to mentality. It actually shifts too far to the right. The path gets actually outward, even though that club was very steep and the left arm was out kind of too far starting down here. This club ends up shifting and going out to the right very far. You can see how far his left arm is from his body there, and the path shifts pretty far out to the right. And his problem was he was hitting some big pushes with the driver and even some hooks. And he said how he had to feel like he tried to swing left through the ball as fast as he could to try to counteract some of that stuff. But again, you can see sort of the problems there and how that path with those compensations is being sent so far to the right. If you go ahead, Eric, and bring that down to where the club shaft is back to 6 again, or back parallel, last parallel, and we look at this. Now we compare these pictures on the left and on the right. You see some pretty dramatic differences. So, on the left we had a club that was very laid off or starting down very shallow. The player had to try to get the club back to the ball by sort of throwing it around the corner. The left wrist was cupping, and his left arm was staying very close to his body in trying to do so. On the right here, the golfer's left arm was outward starting down. The club shaft was very steep, and so he had to pull kind of doing almost an early extension kind of thing, pull his head backwards away from the golf ball. The left arm would jam out away from him very fast, helping the club head slide back underneath, and then again that path would go too far out to the right. So we hope that in looking at these you get some indication that it's not always about just where that club's sweet spot is, again, at what we call A6. The sweet spot path can sometimes be seen very clearly from that position. It can be very telling, but it can be a misleading position sometimes, and we really have to know where that club is coming from and where it's going to.
Right, just as we need to understand where our students are coming from and where they're going to, it's important to understand where the sweet spot's coming from and where it's going to as well when we work with people. So we hope this video has helped you a lot. Again, key 4, diagonal sweet spot path. Thanks for watching.